Hello and welcome to News Central TV. My name is Mazino Apil. And here are stories making news beyond the continent. We begin the news in South America, where Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has announced that a flight carrying 306 repatriated migrants from Mexico will arrive in Venezuela on the 20th of March. This comes amid growing tensions over the United States' decision to deport Venezuelan migrants to a maximum security prison in El Salvador. The Trump administration recently transferred 238 Venezuelans to El Salvador, alleging their ties to the Tren de Aragua criminal gang. To justify the move, the administration invoked a 1798 law that permits the expulsion of enemy aliens without trial.
Incrementar todas las acciones diplomáticas para traernos a todos los venezolanos y venezolanas de los Estados Unidos. Mañana a las 10 de la mañana ya coordiné, compañero Diosdado Cabello está haciendo las coordinaciones operativas y llegan 306 migrantes que vienen vía Aeropuerto de México. Y le he dado la orden al enviado especial para las negociaciones de paz con Estados Unidos, doctor Jorge Rodríguez, que incremente todas las acciones para garantizar los vuelos de regreso desde Estados Unidos de todos los migrantes que han sido detenidos. Vamos a regresar todos los migrantes que han sido detenidos para darle respeto, dignidad, apoyo y vuelvan a su patria y vuelvan a su familia.
In Europe, efforts to end the ongoing war have seen Ukraine, Russia and the United States engage in peace talks focusing on a potential ceasefire, territorial disputes and security guarantees for Ukraine. Diplomatic sources suggest some progress has been made, but major disagreements persist, particularly regarding Russia's continued military presence in occupied regions. The United States has reaffirmed its support for Ukraine's sovereignty while urging both sides to pursue a peaceful resolution. However, Ukraine remains firm in its demand for a full withdrawal of Russian troops, while Moscow insists on security guarantees and the lifting of sanctions. International mediators have called for sustained dialogue to prevent further escalation. While the talks mark a significant step in diplomatic efforts, a concrete resolution remains elusive. So to discuss this, we're joined by Ejike Okpa, Global Affairs Analyst. Ejike, you're welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Now, if you'd tell us how significant it is that the involvement of Saudi Arabia as a host for U.S., Russia, Ukraine peace talks, and what does it signal about shifting diplomatic alliances here?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that Saudi Arabia wants to host that. You know, every nation always wants to inject their own, presence in issues of global significance so that they can say, hey, I played a role. It doesn't really matter where this peace talk takes place. I just want to see peace happen. And Zelensky is holding his ground and Putin is holding his ground. Something has to give. In diplomacy as well as in economics principles, that's what they call opportunity cost. What are you willing to give up to get something else? If those opportunity costs are overlooked or ignored, then it's like back to status quo, and we don't want the war. The world is tired. The Ukrainians don't want the war. The Russians don't want the war. So what you're dealing with now are the egos of two presidents who want to, insist that certain things work their way. So Russia has to reconsider, what it is. They want this sanction lifted, and Ukraine said, "Hey, give back some of the land you've taken from us." All those things are sticky, and they are the negotiating points. Somehow, somewhere, hopefully they will come together and withdraw. It's just very cognizant of what the Europeans do. If the European nations are actually significant in preventing certain things, they should have been ahead of things, and not where it's gone to where it is 3 years, hence people, have died. Nobody knows how many people have died in this war. And properties destroyed. And now, Trump came in and said, okay, we're going to have to end this stuff. There's no magic wand to what Trump is going to do. But at the same time, peace will not exist if the two warring factions are not coming to terms with their own reality. It's always been this case, and we're hoping that, Zelensky and Putin sometime will meet and then shake hands. Anytime you inject third parties in a conflict of two people, it's gonna expand.
Okay, then,
Look at it.
So I heard you note the egos of the two parties here as a sticky issue, but what are the key striking points that are preventing a breakthrough in negotiations, particularly regarding NATO membership and territorial integrity and also security guarantees?
Well, look at it this way. If Russia were to have presence in, in Cuba, which is a very close, or Mexico, which is next door to us, America's not going to like it. So what Putin is saying is that I don't want Ukraine to be a member of NATO, because what he says in one of the original and very important part of the NATO agreement is that, when you attack one, you attack all. So if Ukraine were to become a NATO member, then it becomes the responsibility of all the member nations to defend it. And so Russia said, we don't want that. So that has to be off the table. Because it's too close for comfort, and we don't want that as any part of a peaceful agreement or peace agreement they're going to make. It's reasonable because everybody wants to make sure those surrounding you are your neighbors. When you have one that is not your neighbor, then it creates detention and suspicious ways to say, hey, what are they doing? Are they going to attack us overnight or in the morning or whatever? And we're not going to do that. Everybody wants some comfortable existence, and they want to do it in their geography, but not have to worry about who is looking over the fence and might likely attack them. So, Ukraine might say, okay, fine. Ukraine, all these people used to be part of the old Soviet Union, until that union fell apart and everybody now trying to assert their own independence. Remember, the former president of Ukraine is in Russia. That's where he is living.
Oh, yeah, so one final question here. How might the stance of Western allies, including the UK and EU, influence Ukraine's negotiation position and the likelihood of a ceasefire here?
Well, again, none of the European nations has a very strong fighting, army. I think that agreement was reached when the World War ended, and part of U.S. influence of ending the war is that England, and France. Those are the three, significant countries in Western Europe. You're not going to have any fighting army, and we're going to come and help you. But that's been how many years since 1948? It's more than 70 years or almost 70 years. And they say, hey, you can defend yourself. America don't have to now be the one coming to your rescue when you have your own internal crisis. And if you go back into some of the reaction, against Trump, is that Trump said, hey, NATO members, you have to pay for your own defense. Because they haven't done that. They have instead used their defense money to do social programs and then, leaving themselves vulnerable to where they are. And so if they were to change that situation and become a very stronger Western European, instead of just, toothless bulldogs, making noise without biting, then maybe things will change. But remember, love is proximity. The nearer, the better. The closer, the better. If Ukraine and Russia will look each other in the eyes and say, okay, fine, we've made some wrong calls, here's what we're going to do. You can redraw the boundary lines. Let the land that's been taken stay where it is. You can say, okay, fine, you take this land. If for whatever reason you find mineral in those areas, we have to share it in a revenue kind of way. Then everybody go about their business. Well, if not, you still have to be dealing with the egos of the president. Remember, in the 200 or so countries in the world, is the ego of the president or prime ministers or the head of government that oftentimes causes all the hardship and difficulty that we have in the world. Because, and so, I'm hoping.
Well, my apologies, but I'll have to cut you short because will have limited time. But thank you very much for your submissions here regarding the issue. We appreciate this.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced that Ukrainian and U.S. officials will meet in Saudi Arabia on Monday to discuss a proposed halt to Russia and Ukrainian strikes on energy facilities. His statement comes as the Kremlin confirmed that Russia officials will also hold talks with the U.S. in Saudi Arabia on the same day. Speaking in Norway, Zelensky said Ukraine's technical team will participate while separate meetings between Russia and American representatives will take place. Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov also confirmed that Moscow will send Grigory Karasin and Sergei Beseda for the talks after discussions with U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. The delegations are expected to explore initiatives previously discussed by Presidents Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump regarding the Black Sea and ceasefire conditions.
На наступній найближчій зустрічі, яка буде в понеділок в Саудівській Аравії. Будуть технічні наші команди. Я так розумію, структура така, що зустріч буде України з Америкою, а потім, як казали американські партнери, челночна дипломатія, а потім Америка з Росією. Або це буде паралельні такі зустрічі в одній країні на одну тематику.
The Kremlin on Thursday accused European countries of planning to militarize rather than seek peace as Western military chiefs gathered in Britain to discuss how to protect Ukraine. Major European powers, including France and the UK, have sought to boost military spending since Donald Trump took office in January, amid fears the US is no longer committed to European defense. As Trump builds closer ties with the Kremlin, Russia has shifted much of its anger over the three-year Ukraine conflict towards Europe, accusing the EU and UK of being the main obstacles to peace. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that the signals from Brussels and European capitals concern plans to militarize Europe.
Что осталось? Отношение к праву? Ну, вообще смешно об этом говорить. Что у них осталось из объединительной повестки? Вот вроде была зеленая экономика. К чему она свелась? К милитаризации. Что из этого является для них объединительной повесткой? Ничего, кроме русофобии. Поэтому ее и эксплуатируют. Они придумывают псевдо-угрозу со стороны России теперь уже в отношении Западной Европы, и отсюда заявляют о необходимости накачивать оружием уже самих себя. И продолжают курс на милитаризацию, о чем мы сегодня уже с вами говорили. Ну и, конечно, сказывается и инерционность западноевропейских политических элит, которые упорно не замечают происходящих тектонических изменений, в том числе в развитии ситуации вокруг Украины.
Let's also tell you that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he discussed potential U.S. control of the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, that's the nuclear power plant, with former U.S. President Donald Trump. Speaking to reporters, Zelensky clarified that their discussion focused solely on the Zaporizhzhia power plant, which remains under Russian control. His comments came after Trump reportedly proposed that the United States take ownership and operate Ukraine's nuclear plants as part of his latest bid to negotiate a ceasefire in the ongoing war. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant station, the largest in Europe, was seized by Russian forces in the early days of their February 2022 invasion. Since then, it has remained a flashpoint of concern over the risk of nuclear incident.
Щодо атомної станції. Питання було ніякої не мережі атомних станцій. Питання було виключно станції, яка сьогодні знаходиться під тимчасовою окупацією, і вона, як ви знаєте, в небезпеці через те, що Росія там панує зі зброєю, так, і вона не працює знов-таки через те, що Росія абсолютно незаконно її утримує, її окупувала. Президент запитав, а якщо буде розуміння, що Америка може це відновити. Я йому сказав, так, якщо можна модернізувати, вкладати гроші, тощо, ми готові це обговорювати з вами. Але ми говорили виключно про одну станцію, яка знаходиться під тимчасовою окупацією.
President Volodymyr Zelensky firmly rejected suggestions by U.S. President Donald Trump that the United States could take control of Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Speaking at a news conference in Oslo, Zelensky stated that such negotiations were not legally possible. Zelensky stated that the issue would not be up for discussion, stressing that Ukraine currently operates 15 nuclear power units, all of which are owned by the Ukrainian state. However, Zelensky clarified that while ownership of the plant was non-negotiable, Ukraine was open to discussions regarding U.S. investments once the plant was reclaimed from Russian control. He added that if the U.S. wishes to reclaim the plant from Russian control, modernize it, or invest in it, that would be a separate matter, leaving room for potential future discussions.
Точно не обговорювали з президентом Трампом. Мало того, ми не обговорювали і ті меседжі, про які ви зараз говорите. Я вже бачив в пресі такі меседжі щодо в цілому генерації в Україні. Ми не будемо обговорювати. У нас атомки працюючі на сьогодні 15 блоків. Це все належить нашій державі. Ми доєднані до європейської мережі. Для нас це серйозна гарантія енергобезпеки.
We're going to short break now. When we return, we'll tell you about that Germany urges leaders to bring extremist groups under control. See you on the other side. Welcome back. We continue the news in the Middle East, where we tell you that Israel has confirmed intercepting a missile launched from Yemen as Iran-backed Houthi rebels claim they targeted Ben Gurion International Airport. As part of Iran's so-called axis of resistance against the United States and Israel, the Houthis have been launching attacks on Red Sea shipping vessels and Israel since the start of the Gaza war. They had paused their assaults during the Israel-Hamas ceasefire in mid-January, but resumed missiles and drone strikes after the United States carried out deadly airstrikes in Yemen.
الشعب الفلسطيني المظلوم وردا على مجازر العدو الصهيوني المجرم بحق إخواننا في قطاع غزة نفذت القوة الصاروخية في القوات المسلحة اليمنية عملية عسكرية نوعية استهدفت مطار بن غوريون في منطقة يافا المحتلة وذلك بصاروخ باليستي فرط صوتي نوع فلسطين 2 وحققت هذه العملية هدفها بنجاح بفضل الله ولليوم الخامس
Are at an all-time high in Turkey after authorities detained Istanbul's Mayor Ekrem Imamoglu just days before he was set to become the opposition's presidential candidate. The move has sparked widespread protests, with many calling it an attack on democracy. For News Central international correspondent Afua Hagan reports here.
Chaos on the streets of Istanbul. Protesters flood public spaces, chanting against President Erdoğan after the shocking detention of the city's mayor, Ekrem Imamoglu. Police have arrested at least 100 people, including opposition politicians, journalists and business figures, as part of an investigation branding Imamoglu a criminal organisation leader suspect. Authorities accuse him of corruption and aiding a terrorist group. The unrest has spread beyond Istanbul. Students at universities, commuters in underground stations and citizens nationwide are defying a government ban on public gatherings to voice their anger. Authorities have shut down metro services and blocked roads, while the Istanbul governor's office has imposed a 4-day restriction on protest. But demonstrators remain undeterred. Footage shows riot police clashing with crowds, using pepper spray to break up protests outside Istanbul University. Meanwhile, social media platforms like X, YouTube, Instagram and TikTok have been restricted, according to UK-based internet watchdog NetBlocks.
Üzülerek söylüyorum, milletimizin iradesini gasp etmeye çalışan bir avuç akıl.
In a video recorded from his home, Imamoglu vowed to stand resolute against what he calls politically motivated charges. He later posted a handwritten note declaring that the people of Turkey would resist lies, conspiracies and traps. Imamoglu's party, the Secular Republican People's Party, has denounced the arrest as a coup against our next president. The sentiment is widely echoed by opposition leaders, including Imamoglu's wife, who is urging citizens to raise their voices. The backlash extends beyond Turkey. The EU, France and Germany have all condemned the arrests, with the Council of Europe warning that the move undermines democracy. The economic fallout is immediate, the Turkish lira plummeting to an all-time low against the US dollar, reflecting market fears over the growing instability. The arrest is the latest in a crackdown on opposition figures, journalists and even entertainers. With presidential elections set for 2028, analysts say Erdoğan may seek constitutional changes or an early election to stay in power. But for now, the streets of Istanbul remain a battleground between the government and those demanding democratic change. For News Central, I'm Afua Hagan.
Meanwhile, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has urged the Syrian government to bring under control and hold accountable groups behind sectarian massacres committed this month. Baerbock made the call after meeting Syria's interim leaders on Thursday. Baerbock described the situation in Syria as particularly volatile and said the country was on a knife edge as it seeks stability after years of civil war. Baerbock, who officially reopened her country's embassy in war-ravaged Syria during her one-day visit in Damascus, called on the transitional government of interim President Ahmad al-Sarraj to control the actions of the groups within its own ranks and hold those responsible accountable.
Gesprächen dann im Anschluss mit der Übergangsregierung unterstrichen, dass es jetzt an Ihnen liegt, dass aus Worten Taten werden, dass es jetzt an Ihnen liegt, dass extremistische Gruppierungen in Ihren Reihen unter Kontrolle gebracht werden und Verantwortliche von Verbrechen zur Rechenschaft gezogen.
And that's all on Beyond the Continent this evening. Remember, you can send your eyewitness reports to the WhatsApp number displayed on your screens now. Do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You may also watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, GoTV channel 23, Star Times channel 274, Able TV, and of course on YouTube. Many thanks for watching. My name is Mazino Appeal.